Hello everyone, welcome back to the JAS workshop. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 shutdown, so I think it might be time to do another video, and I think I've been promising you this one for a while. We're going to look at some CAN network stuff today. What is it? What does it look like? How can we interpret it? Let's see where we go. Okay, so in terms of what CAN is, CAN, or Controller Area Network, is a system that the car uses to allow each computer in the car to talk to each other. Basically, if you ignore the fact that this is a car and just think of it as a whole set of computers on wheels, each trying to fulfill the programming that each one of those computers is programmed to do, all the time while you're driving, those computers are trying to keep the car level, keep the car going at a certain speed, all that kind of stuff. If you think of it as a collection of computers that need to talk to each other in order to fulfill their programming requirements, then CAN becomes a lot simpler. So in this car, we've got two different CAN networks. One is called the high-speed network. The other is the medium-speed network. Why it's not called high speed and low speed when there's only two of them, who knows? But it's high speed and medium speed. If we ignore the fact that there's two different ones for now, they both work in pretty much identically the same way. They both communicate down two wires. So the high-speed network's got two wires that go around all the high-speed modules, and the medium-speed network's got two wires that go around all the medium-speed modules. They do actually cross over. In this car, it's in the instrument pack, and the instrument pack is on both those networks, and the instrument pack is able to decode both network messages and, if necessary, pass messages between the high-speed network and the medium-speed network. But back to what we were talking about, what is CAN? So this is our engine bay, or e-box it's called. We've got the engine control module here, fuses and so on. But what is CAN? You see these two wires? The two twisted wires? That is CAN. That is part of the network. Those are two of the wires that those messages travel down to visit, if you like, each module on that network. So that's CAN. And this is also CAN. Here you can see messages scrolling past on the screen. We're using a device called a CAN sniffer. And this basically reads all the messages passing through the CAN network and just displays them on the screen. Technically this isn't all the messages, but right now all you need to notice is we've got messages scrolling past and quite a lot of them. That's also CAN. We're talking electronics, so obviously Pico's in the game. This is also CAN. We'll zoom in on that right now. So this is just some CAN data we recorded a few seconds ago. But as I say, we'll just zoom in and zoom in some more. Right now it doesn't really matter what we're seeing, because this is also CAN. We've got two wires in each CAN network. Each one of those wires carries a higher voltage than average, and the other one carries a lower voltage than average. So here the blue wire, if this is average, we'll use that term for now, voltage, and then this goes higher, back to average, higher, back to average, higher, back to average. And the other one, the red one, starts as average, if you like, and goes lower than average, and back to average, and lower than average, and back to average. That is also CAN. So you might not be able to see, but that's 2 seconds of data across the screen. We have to zoom in quite a long way before we see anything kind of meaningful. If we imagine that's a message, that one message from start to finish took around about 223 microseconds. That's 223 millionths of a second. So pretty quick. And that is also CAN. So, stupid question time. Why CAN? Why are we using CAN? Why is it in these cars? As I say, it's a system the car uses or the computers use to pass messages from one computer to the next computer. Why don't we just use, for example, just backtrack a second. So we're sending messages around the car from one computer to another computer. Let's say that's everything from are the doors open and which door is open, to how fast you're going, to how high the suspension is. Everything that the car knows, more or less, it will transmit on the CAN network. And we use CAN for that because it is a reliable system for passaging information around. It is a fast method of passing messages around, and there's a lot of reasons, but essentially it ends up being cheap, reliable, and fast. And that's about it. So why don't we use, let's say we want for example, the air suspension module in this car needs to know if any of the doors are open in order to operate properly. And then why does the air suspension need to know if the doors are open? It shouldn't, right? But if you imagine, well, one thing it doesn't do, it won't change height when the doors are open. And it won't do that just in case your door is open and you're getting in the car or you're getting out the car. You don't want the suspension to change height while you're getting in or out. You might fall over, Land Rover would get sued. So you could have, for example, an air suspension control module and a switch in each door and a wire from each of those switches going to the air suspension module to say whether the doors are open or closed, and that system would work. But you also want the lights to come on inside the car when you open the doors. So you would need another switch in the doors, another set of wires going to the body control module, or to, say, an interior light control module that would then turn the lights on when you open the door. Not this car in particular, but let's say another car might not let you put it into gear when the doors are open to stop you driving off with the door open. Again, another switch in the doors, another set of wires going to the transmission control module or to the gearbox to stop you doing that. Instead of multiple different switches, multiple different wires, CAN allows us to have one switch in the door, which then, let's say, lets the body control module know if the door is open or closed. The body control module needs to know that anyway, so that it can turn the interior lights on or off. But also, if the body control module knows that information, it can then transmit that door open data on the CAN network and use those two wires that go around every module to tell the transmission control module that the door's open, to tell the air suspension module that the door's open, and so on. Every module in the car could then know that the doors are open. That's one reason why we use CAN. You can spread necessary information around the car very easily across the same two wires as you use to say how fast you're going. So again, how fast you're going, the instrument pack needs to know how fast you're going to display the speed on the speedo. The engine control module needs to know how fast you're going for if you use the cruise control, and obviously it needs to know how fast you're going to know what gear you want to go in. And all that information comes from the ABS control module because it monitors the wheel speeds via the ABS sensors or wheel speed sensors and transmits it on the CAN network. All that information is flying around the car all of the time. And if we talk about speed, I mean, the high-speed network and the medium-speed network, it's not like the messages get there faster. We're not talking about electric that's faster than other electric or messages that are faster than other electric. We're just talking about the data rate. So by that I mean the high-speed network can carry, it works on a speed of 500 kilobits a second. That's 500,000 bits per second, or 500,000 bits per second. A bit, we'll see that in a bit actually, is the smallest piece of data you can have. So electronic communications, for example, that's a 1 or it's a 0. If you imagine a certain space in time on the network, you can transmit a 1 or you can transmit a 0. The next space in time another 1 or another 0, and then again another 1 or a 0, and so on. So on the high-speed network, we can transmit 500,000 1s or 0s every second. The medium-speed network in this car can do 125,000 1s or 0s per second. And that's what we mean by speed. It's not the message will get there sooner, it's just that the bus, because we call it CAN bus, and those two wires are the bus, and we'll see it on the screen again in a bit, but basically 500,000 bits per second is a faster data rate than 125 bits per second, 125 kilobits a second, sorry, because you can fit more data on the bus at any one time than on a slower bus. That's what we mean by speed, and that's why we use CAN, or that's what CAN is used for in this system, for example. So, where does 1s and 0s come into it? Why have we got two wires? And what the hell am I going on about anyway? Okay, here we are then. This is, the car's running just so we get some constant data running across the bus. And here we're only looking at the high-speed bus. We're ignoring the medium-speed bus for now, and only looking at the high-speed bus. We've got 2 seconds across the screen again, and I'm actually asking Pico to do some calculations in the background, which is why it doesn't immediately update the page when it gets to the end. You'll see why in a second or two. And right now we've actually only got the one of those wires, the CAN high, not high speed, but the high wire, if you like, of the high speed network. And I'll show you why again in a second. I'm just going to press stop, and we'll go back a page, and I'll just turn the car off. Okay, again, 2 seconds of data across the screen. We can zoom in on that to start seeing a bit more information. Because right now all we can really see is that there is some activity on that blue. So if I zoom in there, that's about a fifth of a second's worth. So this is about 200 milliseconds across the screen. That's still not showing us anything. If we pick this shortest looking thing there, and zoom in on that, now we're starting to see some information. And this up the top here is some of the calculation that I've asked Pico to do. And I'm going to zoom in on the first half of this, like that. And this is activity on the bus. This is from here to here. This is one message. And right now we don't have a clue what that means. All we know is we've got activity on the bus, and this is on the high voltage, the average to high voltage side of the high-speed bus. Across the top, actually, you can start to see what we're looking at here. So this is a breakdown of what this message means. We'll come back to that in a bit. But for now, you can see we start off in the middle, because right up the side here we're about 2 and a bit volts, and it goes up to 3 and a bit. So this is from idle, if you like. The bus is doing nothing, and then we suddenly start to see this activity where it goes high, back to idle, high, back to idle, back to high but for a shorter time, back to idle but for a shorter time, back to high but for a longer time, and so on throughout the whole message. Each one of these periods of activity, if you like, periods of high, means something, if you like, to the computer. And then each period of low, again, same thing, means something to the computer. And the length of time that it's high for, or the length of time that it's low or idle for, is actually really important. That is how we start to get our 1s and 0s. Across the top here right now, you can see we've got some actual data. But right now, if I just change this up a little, and I change it from hex data to binary data, which is our 1s and 0s, you'll start to see that when it gets there, this is Pico translating our periods of high voltage and our periods of idle voltage into ones and zeros. And I'm just going to go on that very start, if you like. So this is the very start of the message, that idle voltage. And then the voltage goes high, which would be a 0. You can see a 0 here. So this 0, this period of high, this from this time here to this time here, or rather about there, that is the computer transmitting a 0 on the high-speed bus. Ignore everything else and think of even your simplest sensor. It could transmit, or if you feed it with voltage and it sends a 0 volts back, that could mean one thing. It could mean your fuel tank's empty. If you feed a sensor with the same voltage and it returns a 1, or your battery voltage back again, that could mean that your fuel tank is full. Here we've got the exact same sort of thing. The bus here is sending us back 3.5 volts, and it's translating that 3.5 volts as a 0. It's doing the same thing next. So this next period of time here, from there to there, the exact same thing. It's transmitting, sorry, let me change that, call it there. There to there, it's again at 3.5 volts, so it's transmitting a 0. Next period of time, it returns the idle voltage, and the computer translates idle voltage as a 1. And so on throughout the whole message. Here, next period, 1, next period, 1. Next, it goes up to 3.5 volts again, away from idle voltage, and it translates it as a 0. And you can see that through the whole of this message. Alternating zeros and ones. High voltages and low voltages. And this is where it starts to get interesting. A long period of zeros, and then a 1, and another long period of zeros. Now, the length of time that it stays high for will give us a string of zeros, or a longer string of zeros, 4 zeros, 5 zeros in a row. And then the length of time it stays low for, same thing, except we're getting lots and lots of zeros there, not very many ones. But there you get 2 ones in a row, a 0, a 1, 2 zeros, 2 ones. And effectively that's all CAN is. It is alternating zeros and ones. Now I said we got rid of the low side, and we can add that back in like that. And that seems to add complexity, but honestly it doesn't. All we've got, if we go again and look for a smaller one, and we've got 2 messages on screen again there, but if we just look at the first message again, the low side of our high-speed CAN network is at the same idle voltage, but every time the high side goes high, up to 3.5, the low side drops down to 1.5. And CAN uses this as an error check. So if one side doesn't match the other side, it knows not to listen to that message. That message is invalid, something went wrong. Don't take everything in that message as gospel. If you imagine some of the things floating around this bus seem to be fairly innocuous, whether doors are open or not, or whether you're going 2 miles an hour or 3 miles an hour. But also CAN messages get sent around the bus along the lines of the gearbox saying, I'm about to change gear. And the engine needs to know that, because right when the gearbox changes gear, the engine needs to massively reduce the torque, because if it carried on outputting full torque while you were trying to change gear, or while the gearbox was trying to change gear, you would end up with bits of gearbox on the road and you wouldn't be going very far at all. So CAN includes a number of different ways of error checking itself. One is this mirrored CAN high and CAN low. And if they don't match, the message will get ignored, cancelled, whatever. until such time as the correct messages start coming through again. Another way that it error checks itself is, if you imagine here, this is one part of the message, the yellow bit, that will be more important in a bit. We'll ignore the green bit for now. All the blue here, sorry, this is blue purpley colour, is the actual data included in that message. And right at the end here we have this light blue, and that is another form of error check that it performs on itself to make sure that the message itself, the data itself, was valid. So that's our can high and can low. That's why you have two wires, not just one. Another method it uses of ensuring the integrity of those messages is the wires that we showed you earlier. In fact, I'll just go and have a quick look at those. I don't know if anyone noticed, but they were twisted. That's what's called a twisted pair. So we're in here looking at, oh, you just can't see them. These two wires. The yellow and black and the yellow and brown. And they're twisted around each other. If you had, and this is getting into electrics rather than electronics, but it's still kind of cool. If you had two wires and you laid them alongside each other, and down one wire, if you laid them next to each other, almost touching, but insulated so that there's no actual electrical contact between them. If you pass electric current down one wire, even with nothing being transmitted or anything down this other wire, if you push electric down this wire, some electric will be induced in this wire. And that's how transformers work, if it's something you're interested in. So what we don't want is to transmit a message down this wire. The higher the voltage, the lower the current, but whatever. Every time you send a message, you potentially induce a current. You use current in this wire. What you don't want is for them to be side by side for long periods, because as you pass voltage down this one, the same voltage or a similar voltage or some voltage will get induced in this one. The way that it cancels that is to twist the wires around each other, and that way they're not running straight alongside each other. They're twisted around each other, and that twist prevents or helps prevent, it's called crosstalk, induced voltage in one of your wires that was originally transmitted down the other wire. So that's another way that CAN uses to reduce errors in transmission errors in transmission. So here's something else Pico can do for us that will just help us understand a little bit more about what those ones and zeros mean, and effectively what CAN does, or how CAN functions. So down here at the bottom we've got some data. You can see they're all focused around this 361 millisecond mark, and that's between these two cursors here. There's actually two, even though it looks like there's one. Again, 2 seconds across the screen, and we're looking at this tiny little bit over here, and in that tiny little bit we've got 3 messages. They're all valid, there's no problems with them. So if we start zooming in over there, we'll have a look at what those 3 messages are. So again, just a period of activity here, and that's in between these cursors we can see the 3 messages. So let's zoom in just there. Now you can start to see a bit more detail. 3 messages. That could be 1, that could be 2, that could be 3, or first, second, third. So let's just zoom in on that first one and nothing else. And let's actually move our last cursor just to here. How about that then? Between the cursors, which are here at the start of the screen and right there, you can see it's translated them as lots of ones and zeros across the top. And we know that this would be, remember, a 1 and a 0 up here. Lots of zeros here, lots of zeros here, lots of ones here. And it's actually translated that whole message for us here, so that it's translated the ID, which is that yellow section we mentioned earlier, the data length count, which is 8, which means we're looking for 8 bytes, not bits, 8 bytes of data, And then following that, we get these bytes of data here. And as you can see, there are 8 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All different numbers, some letters. That's confusing, right? Next is the light blue bit. That's one of our one of our error checks. We're going to ignore all of this stuff at the end for now, but all this bit means at the end is that this whole thing was a valid message. We go right to the start then. I'll just change this slightly actually, but you can see here again, this is what we had at the start. In the yellow, which we now know is our ID, the identification of this message, that was split into 2 parts, a 0, a 1 and a 0, and a 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. And it just so happens that 0, 1, 0 in binary, which is what 1s and 0s is a 2. There's no 1s, there's 1, 2, and there's no 4s. So add those all together, you just end up with a 2. And guess what, down here, the first part of the ID is a 2. So if the computer knows that the first, after it becomes active, which is this 0, if it knows that the first 3 bits, each one of these is a bit, a 1 or a 0, it knows that the first 3 bits are the first part of the ID, it will know as soon as you become active, count the next 3 bits, whatever that is, that's the first part of the ID. The first part of the ID is 2. That's fairly simple. It then knows that the next, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It knows that the next 8 bits are the second part of the ID. The second part of the ID is a 1, 1, 0, 0. That's one part of it. And the next part is 1, 0, 0, 1. Which translates out here as a 9 and a 3. And if we look at it, 1, 1, 1, that is, so a single 1, no 2s, no 4s, but 1, 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. Guess what? The next part of the ID is 9. But this whole part here is one number. So it's not just 9, it's 9 plus the last bit. A 1, a 2, no 4s, no 8s. 2 plus 1 is 3. Guess what? 3. So that next string of data, those next 8 bits, is 93. All transmitted in terms of 1s and 0s by idle voltage, active, idle, active, and idle again. And that adds up to a 93, and that's the ID. That's the identification of this message. CAN is a message-based system. It sends out messages rather than continuous data. It sends each message as a packet, if you like. And this packet starts with 293. So this message is called, for whatever reason, 293 or 293. Whatever data is in there, let's say that this is, for example, and I'm going to be lying, but we'll just make it up as we go along. Let's say this is something to do with the doors being open or closed. So this could have been transmitted by the body control module to say, all the doors are closed, but the bonnet is open. And within this data here could be the information that says, all the doors are closed, but the bonnet is open. And let's say that the air suspension control module, as we said earlier, would want to know if the doors are open or closed. So the air suspension module will be looking for message 293 to see if there's anything in it that is relevant to what it's trying to do. If it's not trying to raise or lower the suspension, it won't really care if the doors are open or closed. But if it's been told to raise the suspension, and last time the message went past, last time message 293 went past, all the doors were closed, before it raises the suspension, it will look at that message again and see if anything's changed, see if the door is now open. And if it is, it won't raise the suspension. But as we move on through this data, let's ignore the green bit because right now we're not too interested. Data length count is a bit more interesting, which just comes up as an 8, and that's this green bit here. no twos, sorry, no ones, no twos, no fours, but 1 8. Transmitted as an idle voltage and 3 active periods, if you like, meaning 8, which means that the next, the computer will now look for 8 bytes of data, and each byte is made up of 8 bits. And again, we can count them on the screen. So here we said that the next 8, we're looking for 8 messages, or 8, sorry, we're looking for 8 bytes of data. And those 8 bytes of data are listed down here as, this is a byte, a 0, 0. 2 of those digits is 1 byte of data, made up of 8 bits, as we said. So this 0, 0 is going to be made up of, you would think, and I've picked a really bad one here. So I wonder if there's a better one. Right, this is a bad thing to look at, but it explains something else as well. We said earlier that both halves of the message have to match in order for the message to be valid. And this message is valid and both halves of it match. But if it didn't match, there would have to be a cutoff period, let's say a tiny, tiny bit of a second. Those two things could potentially not match up, or there could be a reason there could be a valid reason for it to not match up, but the computer would have to ignore it because it's still a valid message. At the other end of the scale, after a certain period of not matching up, it's going to have to log a fault, or it's going to have to do something. One thing it has to do is monitor how long it's been transmitting zeros for, or how long it's been transmitting ones for. And if it's been transmitting zeros for too long, it will automatically switch to a 1 just for 1 bit length, and then back to zeros, just to make sure that everything is still functioning properly. And it will do the same with ones. If it's been transmitting ones for too long, it will automatically change to a 0 for 1 bit length, just to make sure that everything is still working properly. And that's exactly what's happened here, because we've said that each byte of data, this first byte of our 8 that are expected to be incoming, we'll expect that to be 8 bits long. And here we've got a 0, a 0. You would think a 1, right? It's not. Ignore that for a second. 0, 0, an ignoring bit. A 0, a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0. So we're up to 6. Sorry, we're up to 7. Another ignoring bit, and our final 0. If you count them across the top, that's 0. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's our first byte of data. And that data is 0, 0, as in nothing. It should be completely zeros. It's not, because of this thing where it switches state to make sure everything's still okay. And this, where it should be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, all across the top, all the way up to our 8th bit. After these 5 in a row, it changes state. And then back again straight away. It actually did the same thing over here, because the previous data was this telling us we had 8 incoming bytes. And the final 3 bits of that data were zeros. So 2 bits later, which is part of this next message, it has to change state for 1 bit length in order to tell itself that everything's okay. And then you carry on with the message, another 5 zeros. We've had 2, here's another 5. You've had 5, you have to change state again, just to make sure everything's okay, back to a final 0. So that message does end up being full of zeros, ignoring this stuff here. And that is actually legitimately called bit stuffing. It will stuff the opposite bit that is being transmitted in there to prove everything's okay, but in terms of the actual data, it will 100% ignore it. That's what this is here, actually, bit stuffing valid, tick. So it's done some bit stuffing, it had to, in order to do one of its little self-checks. And then it can ignore it and just look at the actual data. Don't look at the stuffed bits, which are these ones, and just look at the zeros, and it comes out here. as 0, 0, which is exactly what we wanted to see. This one here then, whichever this one is, starts. Okay, we can even try and figure it out. So 0, 0, 1, 0. There's no stuffed bits in this message here. From here to here, there's no stuffed bits, so we can figure it out. 0, 0, 1, 0. So that's a 2. So it could be this one here. It could be the third byte. And then 0, 1, 1, 1. So that's a 1, plus 2 is 3, plus 4 is 7. So it is that one. We've got a 2 and a 7. So that's this byte. That's what CAN looks like. That's how it transmits its data. And that's what the computer does, or what each computer does to translate it into data that it can understand. It looks at voltages, and one voltage means one thing, and another voltage means another thing, and that's literally it. And then a string of those voltages can be translated into a string of ones and zeros, and a string of ones and zeros, depending on the programming, can be translated into your door is open or your suspension is high. We're going to quickly jump back onto the CAN sniffer and look at something else, or look at a slightly different way of looking at almost the exact same thing as what we just looked at, but slightly more intuitive. Why I didn't do that first, I don't know, but that's how Sundays go. Okay, here's our CAN sniffer again. We had this right at the start to show you roughly, to give you one idea of what CAN looked like. So this is back to the CAN sniffer to show you that again, but then a slightly different way of looking at it, which I think is really interesting. You might have other ideas, but let's see where we get to. So as before, the car right now is asleep. Nothing is awake, and there's no messages being transmitted on the bus. Actually, this is listening to the high-speed and the medium-speed bus. It will display them both on screen. So I'm just going to wake it up by opening the door again. Immediately you can see messages starting to be transmitted. Right now we're about 600 frames a second. That's 600-ish messages a second. That's just dropped down to 400. As modules go to sleep, obviously we haven't turned the ignition on, we haven't started the engine. There's no need for some modules to be transmitting, so it's gradually shutting those modules down. As those modules shut down, they stop transmitting the messages that they would normally be transmitting. So down to about 440 messages now. They're all on bus 1 right now, so that's all our medium speed bus. There's no need, the car thinks there's no need for the messages, for the high speed to be awake, so there's no point it transmitting any messages. It's all on the medium speed bus. This here is our column of IDs. The 0x or 0x to start with just designates that it's a hexadecimal rather than a decimal or a binary number. So 4AI, it's basically in letters and numbers, hexadecimal. This column, data length, we've looked at that on Pico, so these are all 8-byte messages, and this is the actual data from those messages there. We could, if we wanted, listen to none of them, only one particular one, or all of them like we were before. So 420, 440-ish. I'm just going to start the engine. Actually, with opening the door, you can see the high-speed buses come alive as well. And we're back up to about 580 messages a second. Ignition on. And car started. It just picked just over 600 messages a second, so a few more when we're running the engine. But with the engine off, that will gradually go to sleep again. And the way we're going to look at that is if we go on the actual sniffer here, and if we say fade inactive bits, it will start to get rid of any of those messages that aren't transmitting anymore. Right now I've still got a full page's worth, but you can see as they fade and stop transmitting, it will delete them off the page. But we want to look at this in a different way. Right now it's only showing us ones that are changing, so when you see it go green or red is when it changes. That one's going between 7.0 and 3.0. These are all changing all the time, these messages here, for whatever reason. But this is just showing us the actual bytes, the data that those bytes are containing. It's changed between 13 and 1A and 1E and 1F and 22 and 23 and so on. We want to look at that a slightly different way. And we want to look at it in bit form. So you can see again that things are changing and some things aren't changing. But actually, I'm just going to get rid of all of them and only bring back this one, because I know what this one does. And right now you can see it's not doing anything. Nothing is changing whatsoever. I'm going to unfade it actually as well. So that's the ID 337. We know what that would look like on the waveform in terms of voltages. It would be a 3, which would be a 0, a 1, a 0, a 1 and a 1, which adds up to 3. Then another 3, so a 0, 1, 1 again, and then 7, however you make up a 7. And then we've got our 8 bits of data, 8 bytes of worth of data. The first byte is not changing, the second byte isn't changing, the third byte isn't changing, and so on. And underneath it, this is the data in hex. So 0x, again, is just saying it's in hex. So this right now means 1F. And if we're looking at this one in particular, you can imagine on Pico waveform, this would be 0, 0, 0. So a high voltage, a high voltage, a high voltage. And then 5 ones, so 5 bit lengths of low voltage, of average, of idle voltage. That's that one data byte, which would be, as I just said, high, 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 and then lots of lows. Watch what happens to that one message, the one byte, this third byte, as I open the driver's door. Now, how cool is that? So that changed the third byte, the last bit of the third byte changed from being a low voltage to being a high voltage. Nothing else in the message changed. The ID stayed the same, the first byte and the second byte all stayed the same. All the other bytes still just contain 0 and it's just disappeared off the screen. Obviously. There we go. Right, door's closed. We've gone back to whichever one it was at the end. But driver's door, this message, 337, is going to be something to do with are the doors open or closed? Because as I open the driver's door, that goes away. If I open the rear passenger door, that one. Driver's door open, passenger door open together, close both. So this is a really cool way of looking at the actual bit changes without having to go digging through Pico data, for example, and looking for a change in a voltage. This program, this CAN sniffer, does it for us, and then decodes each message into either the actual data, so a 1F, to a 1E when we open the door, back to a 1F when we close it. It shows us the actual bit which changes. When we do that one thing, which is opening the door. We can show all of them again, and 337 has now disappeared off the screen because we're showing all of them, but we can go and find it. 337 here. So among this whole screen which is changing, there's our one bit. And remember, if we do it like this, 337 is this line here. If I open the door, you saw it change from a 1F to a 1E and back to a 1F again. You see it change. Remember, we've got so much data going on here that it's hard to display it that quickly, which is why it's useful to go through each ID at a time, looking for changes in the data. But I think that's pretty cool. That shows us it shows us the way the computer looks at the data, and it shows us it in a way that we can actually understand, rather than having to look at voltages. If we know what we're looking for, which was 337, we can have the driver's door open, the rear driver's door open, the tailgate open, the rear passenger door, and the driver's door, and the passenger door. And that's got rid of all of those bits now. All those active bits have now become inactive. Because with 5 doors open, we got rid of 5 bits. So that's driver's door shut, second door, tailgate, rear passenger door, front passenger door. Now hopefully that will give you an idea of what CAN is and what CAN does. So, did that make any sense whatsoever? I hope it did. If we're shut down for much longer, I'm going to have to do some more videos because I'll go crazy. That'll probably be good for you guys because you can take the piss out of me again and more, as you usually do. That's JAS Land Rovers on a Sunday, back on YouTube, finally. Apologies it took so long. Any more things you want to know? Give us a message. Peace.